Since 1785, the Times has been essential reading.
Now, it's essential listening.
Times Radio chooses conversation over confrontation.
Covers Westminster and beyond.
Ask the right questions.
To keep you well informed.
We give words space and let the stories do the talking.
Listen on DAB radio, online, on your smart speaker or via our app.
Welcome to this co-production by The Times, the Sunday Times Cheltenham Literature Festival in Litquake, San Francisco, part of a 5-episode series celebrating the careers of major world writers as part of Cheltenham Read the World theme. I'm Ingrid Rojas Contreras, Colombian immigrant, author of the novel Fruit of the Drunken Tree, and I'm joined here today with Isabel Allende, author of 26 books. You know her from The House of Spirits and more recently Long Petal of the Sea and The Soul of a Woman. Your books have been translated into so many languages and you've received so many awards and honors throughout your career as a writer, and I'm just so honored to be talking to you today.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, for coming all the way here. Thanks.
I understand, are we in what used to be your office once upon a time?
This building is an old Victorian house that has been here for more than 100 years, and we've had it for 25 at least. So there's a coach house in the back where I used to write. Now I write at home because I don't have children, I only have dogs and my current husband.
Mm-hmm. And I read that when you first came to the US, you were disappointed by the lack of ghosts?
Not really.
Not really?
Not really. I grew up with the idea that ghosts could be present, but I've never seen any. I do feel the presence of the spirit of the people I love that are not here anymore, like my parents, my grandparents, especially my daughter, a few friends, many pets. But I sort of adapted to the United States with difficulty for other reasons. I felt that there was such a cultural shock between what I had experienced, my background, my language, and what I was exposed to. Also, I landed in a very dysfunctional family. I married a man who had 3 drug-addicted children, so it was an ongoing tragedy, which didn't make things easier. Plus, my English was really poor, so I couldn't watch TV, I didn't understand the news, I had no references. So in a normal conversation, I was totally lost. And I'm a terrible driver, so I would get lost in the street as well. So yeah. It wasn't easy, but I made a life somehow.
And do you still write in Spanish? Do you prefer the elements of the Spanish language for your fiction? Or have you ever kind of thought about English, maybe?
I have written in Spanish always, fiction and non-fiction. But I can write a speech in English or a non-fiction piece. My latest book, The Soul of a Woman, I wrote in English and Spanish simultaneously. I can do that because it's non-fiction. But fiction, as you know, because you've written a novel, happens in the womb. It doesn't happen in the brain. And if you have to go through all the filters of translation, it becomes stiff. It doesn't have the fluidity and the flexibility of something that you write spontaneously without thinking much.
Mm-hmm. And so Soul of a Woman came from a speech, right?
Well, I had given a speech in Mexico City, I don't even remember which year, and it went viral. So my publishers wanted to create a little booklet or something with the speech, but I read it and it was completely stale, Ingrid. It was so many things had happened in a few months. The Me Too movement, protests in the streets, the Black Lives Matter, a new wave of young feminists that wasn't there when I gave that speech. So I realized that that shouldn't be published. But then I started thinking about my own trajectory as a woman and as a feminist, and looking around, asking around other women of different ages and ethnicities and backgrounds, and that's how the little book came out.
Mm. It's a feminist manifesto and part memoir, and you also talk about all the different women in your life as well. I love the line you wrote, you were a feminist since kindergarten.
I was. Of course, I didn't know that I was a feminist, and the word was not used in my family. They had never heard it. And in Chile, maybe some few people knew about the possibility of a feminist movement somewhere. But this was in the 40s. In Chile, the south of the south, in a very conservative, Catholic, patriarchal family and society. So the fact that I was rebellious, that I couldn't fit in, that I was always angry at male authority, made me a lunatic, not a feminist. And my mother and everybody else in the family was very worried about me. Mm-hmm. Worried for many reasons. First of all, I was expelled from the nuns at age 6. That gives you an idea of the kind of child I was.
And you did
already in kindergarten. I was expelled from some place.
Do we know why? Do you remember why?
Because of my character, I suppose. Okay. But that's what I was told, that I was very rebellious. But I think that the real reason is that my mother had annulled her marriage with my father, and therefore she was out of the church. Mm. And because what God ties, men cannot untie, that was the idea. And there was no divorce in Chile until 2004. So it was the last country in the world to get divorced. So my mother, the only way out of that bad relationship was an annulment. And you could only do that at the time if both people in the couple agreed. Mm-hmm. Because it was really a scam.
And one thing that I just really loved and appreciated about the book was the idea that feminism doesn't have to be a philosophy or ideology, but you're saying it just can come from observing the world and noticing these power structures, and that is feminism.
Yeah, but also it's information, because we are raised in a certain way. We live in a culture that makes you believe certain things, and few people question that. Few people question religion, the law, customs, tradition, unless you are confronted with a fact, or you are confronted with a conversation that opens your mind. That's why I am so happy about this new wave of young feminists, because they are connected in ways that now the technology allows that connection in fantastic ways and makes everything go faster, because you have more of a critical number of people thinking alike. And that's why you can have 1 million people in the streets protesting in 24 hours without any previous organization, because you just get it in your cellular. That was not possible before, and that gives me hope.
Yeah, me too. And then you wrote about being in Chile and writing with a knife between your teeth.
Well, when I started as a journalist, I started in a women's magazine that had a very feminist inclination, let's say. So everything that we published, including sometimes fashion or beauty or whatever, always had a point of view that was feminist in a way, making women aware of many things that we needed to know and had never been discussed in Chile before. It was not part of the national narrative about society or women. And so we were 4 young women. None of us was even 30. We were in our 20s. And we were attacking everything, institutions, the church, laws, everything, with a knife between our teeth. And of course we got a lot of aggression for that, but it was fun.
Yeah.
Because for every blow that you received, you could give 2.
Yeah.
So,
and you had a great sounding column as well.
I decided very early on that you can say everything with humor in Chile. Now everything is politically correct and you can't say anything. But at that time, if you could use humor, you could say anything. And so all my battle against machismo and about male supremacy and everything else was always with humor. And people tolerate it much better.
Mm-hmm. I was also really interested to read that you had always wanted to write a romance novel or like an erotic novel, but couldn't quite do it because of there were problems with the male lead.
Well, when I was working in that magazine, we were competing with another magazine that came from Miami, and we always lost. They would sell more than us, and they sold more because it had a little novella, a little story by Corín Tellado, the most famous Spanish, from the Spanish language, romance novelist. And it was every week or every 2 weeks, a new one of these. So the director of the magazine said, well, we can't compete with this. And I said, I can't write that. This is very easy. I can write it. It's a formula. Let me do it. I'm still trying. Because you really, if you don't believe in the formula, you can't write it, honestly. I don't believe in virgins with big breasts and green eyes that meet CEOs in Polynesian islands. It has never happened in my life. So, of course, I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
But it's a genre that I respect a lot because millions of women, it's the only thing they read. And they can go into this world of fantasy where they are princesses. And that has incredible value.
And this isn't mentioned in the book, but I know that you were also translating romance novels at some point. Also got fired.
I also got fired when I was translating romance novels because I couldn't stick to the text exactly. I changed a little bit the dialogue so that the woman wouldn't look so stupid, and then the ending so that she wouldn't be the submissive mistress or wife or whatever. So I got fired.
Yeah.
That's why I'm telling you, I don't believe in the formula, and that's my problem.
Yeah. I've tried to write love stories, and also it doesn't go
very well.
Go well.
No. And when I write a novel, I have in mind my female protagonist, which I take from real life. I don't make them up. I sort of pick up two people, and with those two people, I make my character. And then, of course, there has to be some love or romance or something, because I like it. I am a very romantic person. And very soon, I don't like the male protagonist.
To be understandable.
Understandable, yeah. And I think if I don't like him, why would my female protagonist like him? I have to kill him. So they almost all die before page 160. And then they have to be replaced by some other lover that is not as perfect as the first one.
Do you think 160, that's the honeymoon period, and then
good.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And usually my first lover, the one that dies, is so attractive, you know. He's dark and a guerrilla probably, an idealist. He has secrets. He's difficult. Wonderful to hear about him, and a mess to live with him. So why would anybody want him?
What's the second?
And the second one is just maybe a professor.
Okay.
It's just a guy.
Less thrilling, but you can live with that. Yeah.
Yes. The thrilling guy never works.
Yeah. I was also very dismayed to read about what it was like to be a woman in that time when your book was coming out, House of Spirits, and being part of the boom generation, and then having a lot of backlash from the press, and I think specifically from Chile.
Chile, yeah. Well, the House of the Spirits was published in 1982, and the boom of Latin American literature had begun in the 60s, but it was peaking then by the 80s. And it was a male event. It was 25, 30 great writers, all of them men. And there was not one feminine voice in the boom, although women had been writing in South America forever. And the voices of women had been minimized or silenced altogether. So there was none of them was recognized as being part of the boom. And then when the House of the Spirits became this huge success and was translated and everything else, some people said, oh, this is the only female in the boom, but very rapidly they said, no, she's post-boom. And I got a lot of bad reviews in Chile. For example, I was in in the cover of the New York Times book review, but at the same week in Chile, a horrible review. So in Chile also, there's what happened, and I've talked to Irish writers and other writers who say, when you come from a small country, this happens all the time, that they feel that there is not enough space for everybody. So anybody who starts to take too much space, especially if it's a woman, gets pulled down. And we have a verb for that, chaquetear, which means pick from the jacket and pull down. And it's a verb, and we use it all the time. It's part of our culture.
This is why Spanish is also better.
Yeah, I'm sure there is an equivalent in English, but I don't know it. I was talking to a Danish author who said that in Denmark, he's Norwegian, and he said, well, in Norway, we hate people who sort of show off or have more success than anybody else, and the way we say is that the nail that protrudes too much is the one who gets the first blow. So, and it has a name in Norway. So Chile is not the only country.
Yeah, it also reminds me of what your agent Carmen Bursel's, like the advice that she gave you, and I read that you kept it by you as you were writing.
To this day.
Yeah.
Carmen Balcells told me when she read the manuscript of my first novel, she said, you are going to have to do double or 3 times more effort than any man to get half the recognition because you're a woman. And that has been the case. And then she added, but you can do it.
Well, I love this advice of just writing whatever it is that you desire, and I think you have done that. When I look back to all of your books, it does seem like a journey into your own particular imagination and just following your own interests at that time.
All my books are different, very different. I have tried everything except an erotic novel, and that was because my mom was alive. She would have not tolerated it. But now, my mother died really old. She was 98. So by the time she died, I have no hormones left for an erotic novel, so that's out of the question. But I've tried historical novels, memoir, literary novels, young adult, you name it. And even a crime novel. I'm going to sign an option for a TV series for that crime. That crime novel is some weird serial killer. So it's perfect for a series because if it's a hit, you can kill a lot of people. I mean, he can keep on killing for several seasons.
Right.
And that's really good. And he kills in many different ways. He's not the usual serial killer that always repeats the same method.
Okay.
Or has the same motivation. No, the motivation will be clear only at the end. But all the murders are different, and that's why the police can never relate them until something happens.
And is this what you're writing now?
No, this was written a long time ago.
Okay.
And I have not tried again a crime novel because it's a very difficult and for me different genre. I write by instinct. I plunge into a story, and then my mind doesn't work in structures. It works in circles. So I go around and around, and in that chaos, in that mess, something comes out. But I don't have a script. I make mistakes that are unbelievable for a writer who has been writing for 40 years. For example, I can have a character that is 18 years old at the beginning and 60 years later is still 18. So that kind of stuff. Because I don't organize it. And a crime novel doesn't work that way. In a crime novel, you have to have everything planned ahead. You have to plant all the clues. You have to put all the red herrings to distract the reader. But it's a fascinating process. Very difficult for me.
Do you have a favorite type of novel that you like to write?
Historical novels.
Historical novel.
Because if I get, for example, a character like Inés Suárez, who was the first the only Spanish woman that came to the conquest of Chile in 1541. She was an illiterate seamstress from Extremadura, from Plasencia. And she came to the New World looking for her husband. And by the time she got to Peru, her husband was dead. And instead of returning as a widow to Spain, she remained and eventually became the lover of the captain who conquered Chile. And this woman, for 10 years, was the most courageous and most efficient of all the captains, and saved the city of Santiago twice, saved the life of the captain I don't know how many times. And yet she was ignored by the historians. And so when you have a character like that, you have an epic event, epic. And because there is very little known about her, you can make it up. So that gives you also a lot of freedom. As long as you are very careful with the time and with the historical events, you can move around. And I love that.
Yeah. And you also started out as a journalist, and I wonder if that's also part of you're using some of the techniques to research and that kind of work.
It helps. I don't know. You are also a journalist, so you also know.
I was also a bad journalist.
Me too. Lousy journalist. Why were you bad?
I think that I would come home. I would do all the reporting, and then I would come home, and then I would be more interested in writing the more interesting story, which would be just the fictional version of what happened. I think in the end I started to do work in translation and decided that I would write fiction because clearly that's what...
Yeah. The same with me, that I would put too much imagination, too much of myself. So I was a lousy journalist, but I learned a lot. I learned to use language efficiently to create an emotion or tension or rhythm in a story. To research, to conduct an interview, you get a lot from interviews. So that kind of thing that you do automatically in journalism has really helped me in literature a lot.
And Along Puddle of the Sea is your recent historical novel, and Pablo Neruda is a central figure in that story. I read that you had heard the story maybe 40 years ago and you had been thinking about it since? It was stored somewhere in some compartment of my brain. But that book is the kind of book I like to write because there is an event that is very clear. It's the end of the Civil War in Spain, and 500,000 refugees in 24 hours came to the border with France. And France didn't know what to do with them. And they were put in concentration camps that were improvised in the beaches. They just put barbed wire around and dumped the people there and started dying. And the poet Pablo Neruda selected 2,000 people and sent them to Chile as refugees in a ship called the Winnipeg. And so the people who got to Chile in the Winnipeg and the descendants of the Winnipeg changed the culture in Chile because he selected intellectuals, philosophers, professors, musicians, the people who came to this faraway provincial country and changed it. And this is a case of immigration that was so obviously fantastic, not only for what the country received, but the fact that these immigrants were received with open arms,
When the Winnipeg arrived in the port of Valparaiso in Chile, there was a mass of people waiting for them, with food, with wine, with songs, with flags, and they invited them to their homes. They had work immediately. So this is one of those stories that has a good ending. And my story is the story of one guy who told me the story, who came to Chile in the Winnipeg, lived in Chile 30 years. Then we had the military coup, and he had to get out of Chile in the same situation that he got out the first time from Spain. Mm-hmm. And I met him in his second exile in Venezuela, where he told me the story 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. But I didn't feel, or the story didn't come back to me until the problem of refugees and migrants is in the air. And everywhere, in Europe and here and everywhere, it's something that you cannot ignore. And then I remembered the story of Victor Pay.
And it's such a different response to refugees and wanting to welcome them in.
Exactly.
And so that was also your exile when you were in Venezuela. Mm-hmm. Do you see that as kind of the beginning of your writing fiction origin?
I wouldn't be a writer, I think. I wouldn't be a writer if I had stayed in Chile. The fact that I had to get out and work in Venezuela in menial jobs, trying to make a living for years, feeling frustrated and not adapting and missing everything I had lost. All that sort of got expressed in the House of the Spirits, which is when I look back, I think it was an exercise in nostalgia, in trying to recover everything I had lost, the family, the country, the memories, everything. And so all that is in the book. I don't think I would have had the need to write that book if I had not had all those losses. Mm-hmm.
I love your writing process. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
People, when I talk about writing, it appears as if the stories come from heaven and I am so blessed and this is a trance. No. I start all my books on January 8th because if I have a day to start, I know that I have a project for the year. My year is complicated. I was traveling a lot. We receive hundreds of emails per day from readers all over the world, and I answer everything. So there is a lot of other stuff to do, not only the writing. So I need to set aside some time to write, and having a day to start is perfect. Also, everybody knows that by January 8th, I'm out. They love it. They love it when they want me in a room, if possible, locked from outside. And also, I prepare myself emotionally, and also I inform myself about to be ready for January 8th. Can you imagine January 7th? I'm a wreck by January 7th. Yeah. It's terrible. So I usually have, by January 8th, my little office is clean from everything that has to do with the previous book. I have organized my dictionaries, my stuff, and all the research I needed, which I keep doing more research during the process, of course, but at least I have what will be the foundation of the book. And I write every single day. It's a day job for me.
And House of Spirits started as a letter to your grandfather.
Yeah, but very soon, like my grandfather was dying in Chile, so I started a goodbye letter. And I wanted to prove to him that everything that he had told me, I remembered. All the family stories, the anecdotes, my grandmother's legend, and everything else. And by the second page, I knew that it wasn't a normal letter, that I was writing something else. And my grandfather would not be able to read it. He was dying. So I wrote at night in the kitchen in the apartment in Caracas. And by the end of the year, I had around 560 pages on the kitchen counter, stained with coffee and tomato sauce. You know, there were no computers. And you would write on a typewriter like this one over here, and with no copies, because having carbon copies was just a mess. So one copy, that is all you
dangerous.
had. One copy. And so I carried that copy in a bag with me everywhere. It was like having an infant on my breast.
Yeah. Did
Terrified.
you have like back problems eventually from?
No, I had it here. Terrified to lose it because there was no other copy. And you could make stencil copies, but have you ever seen a stencil? Probably not, because you're too young. You can't imagine what that is. You know how you correct it in these typewriters? When I wrote The House of the Spirits, cut and paste was cut with scissors and paste with Scotch tape. To delete, you had a liquid called Typex. You put this white liquid until it dried, put it back in the machine, and then write on top. But you couldn't write anything that was longer than what you had written before.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get it, no? And we did it.
Is it a different, did you find that was a different rhythm as you were writing the sentences?
Yes, you had to think before.
Yeah.
Very carefully. Now I just write, and I know that I can delete, I can move paragraphs, I can start again, and everything is done by this machine. Male writers of some means, what they would do, they would write, and some assistant would copy it as many times as he would correct.
Yeah, or sometimes their wives.
Of course, the wife, well, some assistant, usually female. And that was not my case, of course. There was no assistant of any kind. And then the research was in libraries. You couldn't Google anything.
I was just thinking about the opportunity for maybe the option of the thriller that is maybe hopefully happening. Do you have a preference for who will play the serial killer?
No, I never interfere in any way with the creation of somebody else. They have done, with my books, they have done opera, they have done ballet, theater, musical. There was a beautiful musical of Zorro. They have done 2 movies and 1 TV series. So all that is done by other people who work with another language, which is totally different from literature, because it works with images, with color, with action, with actors, with music. It's totally different, the process. So I don't even read the scripts.
Do you have a favorite production of your work?
I like very much a recent production that they did of Inés of My Soul, which is the story of this woman I was telling you, that the conquest of Chile. They did a beautiful mini-series of 8 or 10 episodes, a co-production from Chile and Spain. And I've seen it in Spanish, and I hope it will be shown in English soon.
I was also wondering, I was looking back through a lot of your books, and there's so many Pablo Neruda epigraphs throughout your work, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what his work has meant to you, or what he, as a person, has meant to you.
As a person, I had very little connection with him. I saw him only a couple of times. But his work has accompanied me always. I have been always displaced. I was the daughter of diplomats, then I was a political refugee, an immigrant. I have always been out of my own place. And in a way, the poetry of Neruda reminds me of Chile. It's the roots. But I've been living in English for so many years. And somehow I lose I lose my language. I mean, I can speak Spanish fluently, but writing in Spanish is not the same as speaking. Writing has an element of poetry, and it has to surprise the reader, not only with the story, but with the way the story is told. And when you live in another language, as I do, my Spanish becomes very basic, becomes very practical. I was yesterday on a Zoom, they gave me some honorary thing in the Pen Club in Chile. And one of the people who spoke was a poet. And he spoke in a very approachable language, but what he said made me cry because of the choice of words. What he said was exactly the same thing I could have said, but he could say it in a special way. And that is lost for me by living in English all the time. So the poetry of Pablo Neruda reminds me of the richness of the language, of words I have forgotten, of the rhythm of a sentence, and a lot of imagery also. When he describes a forest of the south, and he only describes the smell of the wood, it reminds me that as a writer is how I have to see the world, with all the senses. It can't be in my brain, it has to be in my senses.
Was that difficult during the pandemic when you were writing? Because I don't know if you could go out that much.
No, I couldn't go out.
Yeah.
I didn't go out. So the first good thing for me was that I didn't have to travel. And then I got what writers always want and seldom get: time, silence, and solitude. So I could be very productive. I wrote The Soul of a Woman, and then I wrote another novel that is already, we have the reader's copy somewhere, called Violeta, that will be published in January. And I am 2/3 through another novel. All this because of the pandemic, because there's nothing else to do.
And Violeta, it's a letter to a son, and then it's...
To a grandson.
To a grandson, okay. And then it's bookended by pandemics as well.
Yeah, it starts, the woman is born in 1920, which is the time when the influenza pandemic reached all of Latin America, which had started really in 1918 during the Second World War in Europe. But by the time we got it, it was 2 years later. And it ends in 2020 with this pandemic. And so it's 100 years of the life of a woman, but that's like the pretext to show a time. And she is dying, and she's writing her last thoughts to her grandson, whom she has raised like her son.
And with the last 2 books, maybe even further back than that, it seems like you've been thinking about the cycles of histories with refugees and the response to refugees and with the pandemic as well.
But you know, that happens always with history, that I start writing about some event that I think is disconnected completely with what we are living together. And then as I plunge into the research and I start writing and bringing up things, then you realize that there are connections, because human beings are always the same. We think that because they lived 300 years ago, they are less complicated or less complex than we are today. The way we live might change, but not us. We are the same. And when you get that very clearly, then you can see the time like opening up, and there is always a connection with the people of today and how we live today. Sometimes we are sort of blinded by technology and science, and we think that's it, but behind all that, it's us. It's always us.
Have you been thinking about Afghanistan and the situation there, and
Yes.
people having to...
Especially because of the women and girls that had endured the Taliban, and then for 20 years were able to get out and have a profession and have a normal life, and now they are back in a burqa, terrified in their homes and in the hands of these fanatic young men. I have a foundation that works with women, with the most vulnerable women, but to see that this is happening and not be able to reach out and do anything for them is terrible.
I was wondering, like, when in your own experience, when you were in Chile, and there was the turmoil and the censorship of the press, and there was that initial fear, and you were kind of as well living through that. Do you know like what made it possible for you, or what was something that you were holding on to in that time?
Well, it wasn't comparable to the Taliban, right. Not at all. It was a horrible dictatorship and a brutal repression, but it was not the Taliban. And at the beginning, during the coup and the first days or weeks after, we didn't know what was going on. Censorship was complete. So there was no free press of any kind. The only thing that there was the controlled news on TV. I had a TV program, and I had to record with a soldier with a gun standing next to me, so I had to quit. Everything was censored. So the information we got were rumors, and the rumors were changing all the time, and sometimes very exaggerated. And sometimes you didn't know at all what was going on. You could be living next to a house where they were torturing people, and you had no idea. So at the beginning, it was confusing, and then the more I got to know what was going on, and you have to get involved, because either you are for the dictatorship or against. There's no middle point here. And if you are against, you have to be either very quiet or try to help. And it depends on the circumstances. Where are you placed in that moment? So there was a point when I was terrified, and I had to get out. First I got out, and then my husband reunited with me in Venezuela, and he brought the kids.
And did you try to help initially before leaving?
Many people did. There was nothing heroic in it, because first we didn't know the consequences, and you get to do things because they just fall on your lap. My best friend's brother was a priest, and that part of the church was very involved trying to save people from this horrible repression. So I would get a call from my friend or his brother that they needed to hide somebody, and I would hide the person in my house, and you would have to be moving the people all the time so that they were not caught, you know, all the time moving them. So my house became a place where people stayed. That could have cost my life and the life of my children, but we didn't know that at the beginning. And as I said, there was nothing heroic in it because we didn't know. We are not used to live under those circumstances. Chile had been the longest and the most solid democracy in the continent.
And when you turned to fiction after going through that, was there, I mean, when I read The House of Spirits, it seems like such an eruption of imagination and also thoughts and emotion. Did you experience it that way when you first started to write fiction?
As I said before, when I wrote that book, I had no idea what I was doing. There was no plan. There was no. I just remembered one thing and another thing, and somehow it worked. I mean, I look back and say, how did it work? I have no idea. And I don't think I could repeat that.
And so you wrote in the kitchen, and I read that now you write in the attic.
Well, that's because I divorced my husband after 28 years. I divorced him when was it? In 2015. And I was 72 years old, and I thought, I'm never going to have another partner in my life at this age. So I want a very small house, very contained, where I can live with my dog. So I got the little house for me and my dog. And then my former husband died, and nobody wanted the dog, so I got a second dog. So now I have 2 dogs, and then this guy fell in love with me, and we ended up getting married. So it wasn't planned that way. So of course there's no space to write. I could come back to write in the coach house, but by now I am used to writing at home all day. Getting in the car and coming all the way and writing for a few hours and then going back home, that would cut my day completely. So I sort of fixed the attic. It's small, very small, but it works.
And you wrote about divorce in The Soul of a Woman as well, and just how, from your mother's experience to your own experience. Can you say a little bit about that?
About divorce?
Or just the changing attitudes and even what you...
In Chile, you couldn't legally divorce. And now there's divorce, but it's sort of complicated. It's not as easy as it is here, that in 6 months you're free. No, it's more complicated. But I married my first husband. We agreed to annul the marriage at a certain point. And then I married Willie, and in the United States. And here it's very easy to divorce. That's the wonderful thing about American husbands, is that they are so easily divorced. So yeah, you can really get rid of them
that's
rapidly.
The redeeming quality, maybe.
Yeah. And so I divorced Willie, and everybody said, how can you divorce at your age? I mean, at your age, you just put up with stuff. Mm-hmm. But it takes more courage to stay in a bad relationship than to divorce, to be alone. So, and now I am with Roger, and I think that he's probably going to be the last one, but I can't be sure.
Is there a particular, if you could choose like where you would write in the house, is there a particular place that
I would love to have a separate place. Before, when I was married with Willie, we had a large house in San Rafael, and there was a pool house. And the pool house was never a pool house. It was always my place. So you walk 30 paces, and you get to a place where nobody can get in. Mm-hmm. It's your private, sacred place. That's what I would like. But you don't always get what you want in this life.
That's true.
It's true.
I'm wondering what books you have planned in the future, if there are stories that you are wanting to tell that you see yourself writing soon, that we can enjoy soon.
I am in the middle of another book, and I never think about the future until I have finished something.
Until January 7th, or?
So I need to finish this, and then I will start thinking on opening up the heart for some other idea. But right now I'm totally concentrated in this story, which happens to be much more complicated to write than I thought it would be. And so I'm totally immersed in that.
Mm-hmm. And do you, how do ideas come to you, I wonder? When's that period when you finish a project and then you're in the dreaming stage of the next? Do you keep a list of potential, or do you just kind of, walk around?
When I start thinking a lot about something, sometimes dreaming a lot about something, I feel it like growing like a bubble inside. And then there's a moment when I feel that I'm ready to write about it. But very seldom I'm looking for a story. The world is full of stories. But the story needs to be connected to me in some way. And according to my son and other people who know me, they say that I have a sense of timing, that I write what's happening now or what will happen, sometimes in a prophetic way, because it's in the air. And I sort of filtrate all of that inside, and I start feeling it like a heaviness, and then I end up writing about it. But I can't tell you now what will be that will create that heaviness in me in the next few months. I don't want even to think about it. I need to finish this thing that I'm doing now.
Well, I wonder, as I'm someone who's written my second book. I wonder how when you think back to the beginning of your career, what writing was like for you then versus maybe what you feel is now, and maybe the ways that you have grown, or what you feel is easy now, and are there similar difficulties?
The easiest thing is the computer. The fact that I don't have to use Typex, and I don't have to use the scissors and Scotch tape. That was the big change. But in all these years, 40 years of writing, I have made many mistakes that I try not to repeat, but there are always new mistakes. And I confront the book with the same anxiety as I did at the beginning. because I don't know when. I know that if I stay with the book long enough, I'll be able to write it. But the first few weeks are terrifying because I don't get the voice. I just find myself in a sort of dead end. I have learned to research. I have learned to cut, because before, I don't know, I would fall in love with a sentence, even if it's not useful at all in the book, and then, because I like it, yeah, put it there. No, you can't do that. So editing, cutting. And also the self-confidence that if I give myself enough time, I can write about almost anything. But that self-confidence fails me when I confront the new book the first days. Then eventually I get into it.
So there's kind of a trust that you've built over time.
Yeah.
What do you know around what book that started to happen?
I would say that it's only in the last 5-6 years.
Okay.
No, be patient.
Yeah.
Be patient, Ingrid. It's not easy.
And I was wondering too if you could tell us a little bit more about the Isabel Allende Foundation. I saw a talk where you were talking about it some years ago. And I know that there's a lot of work with women and that you hear a lot of stories as well. So I'm also interested if there's a way in which that ends up making its way into your work.
Yes, I created this foundation as an homage to my daughter who died prematurely. And the mission of the foundation is to invest in the power of women. And we have chosen certain areas because it's a family foundation. We cannot do everything. So we focus on health, reproductive rights mainly, education or giving some skills for work, because if you don't have the possibility of working, you are dependent, and if you are dependent, there is no feminism. And protection against violence and exploitation, because if you live in fear, there's nothing you can do. So those are the areas in which we work mostly, but now we are focusing a lot in immigration in the border of the United States because of the horrendous human rights crisis that we have in the border, especially the separation of the children from the parents. And so there are thousands of kids that have been separated, and it's just a terrible, terrible thing. So we do that kind of work. Now, I have characters in my books that I have picked up like this from the foundation. I've changed the name, but I have the story. I have, for example, in my book, In the Midst of Winter, I have a woman who comes from Guatemala. I changed the name, but her story of how they massacred her brothers and what happened to her and how she ended up here and the trajectory, the trip to get here, and how she has lived in hiding in the United States because she's undocumented, therefore exploited. I didn't have to make it up. It's there.
And what do you see what fiction can do in terms of, maybe what the foundation can do? There's a number of things, and then what can fiction do? Depends.
Fiction can have a lot of power because it stays. The press is essential, of course, television, the news, but it's more, it's something that we see and we forget tomorrow. A book can stay, and some books, I don't pretend ever to be able to achieve that, but some books have changed history. For example, the Uncle Tom's Cabin did for abolitionists more than all the abolitionist movements before, because everybody was reading it, and everybody for the first time questioned something that had not been questioned by many people. And it was a piece of conversation that opened up the conversation for something that needed to be talked and dealt with. So some few books have that power. Therefore, literature has a space in the world. But now, what is also, I think, encouraging is that the cinema and television are looking for books to transform into movies. And that gives it a huge audience that books don't have, because few people can afford books or have the habit of reading.
Mm-hmm. And in The Soul of a Woman, you mentioned seeing the vagina monologues by Eve Ensler.
Yeah.
Did that have a similar transformative?
Yeah, exactly.
effect?
When Eve wrote that monologue, which was for the theater originally, the word vagina was a bad word. You couldn't say it. I mean, you would be ashamed to say that word in front of the gynecologist. and she put it out there. Mm-hmm. And I remember I went with my mom. My mom was shocked and fascinated and exhilarated. For her, it was the most exciting thing, because she had never thought about it. Mm-hmm. She had had a vagina always and never thought about it. Of course, never looked at it with a mirror, as Eve recommends. So that changed so many things, and also it allowed Eve to create a foundation that has done a lot of work in the field for women.
Mm-hmm. I also saw the play with my mother.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and I was very young. I think that I was maybe 10 or 11, and I remember just how it felt revolutionary. Like, it just felt like a whole new world had opened. It was very exciting. I'm so honored that you joined us today and told us so much about your writing process and your writing life as well.
Thank you, Ingrid, and good luck with this path that you have chosen. That is, you can't go back. You can't. It's forever, and it will take over all your life, and it will be wonderful and horrible.
Mm-hmm. I'm ready.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for watching. You can buy copies of the books discussed via the online bookshop, details of which will be appearing on your screen shortly. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again, Isabel.
Gracias.
Like flowers cultivate in cracks in the concrete, culture grows in the spaces between the everyday. It's there in darkened rooms when the stage lights come on. It's in a park full of people belting out the same song. It happens in classrooms, having a go, hands-on. It's found in small circles, exchanging stories. It's under a tent, making brand new discoveries. It's in those shared experiences that help build communities. It inspires change, provides opportunities. It brings joy, sparks curiosity. It provokes feelings recognizable to everyone, making our hearts race and giving us goosebumps. It's for those who don't think they can have it. It's for those who know that they need it. It fosters connection and understanding. It is ours for the taking, as well as the sharing. Culture is what makes us human. It makes our world better. Culture is our culture. Let's explore it together.
Cheltenham started, my favourite time of the year. Thank you all for being here in person, which is really, really exciting.
in the beginning. It's so nice to be reading. Hi, everybody.
So I set myself the challenge of trying to read a book from every country in the world. I have seen the extraordinary power that stories have to connect us.
When Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, they had to change the sanity test, because they would ask someone, do you know who the Prime Minister is? But even the clinically insane knew that it was Margaret Thatcher. Now, I have a feeling that we are in the same position now with Boris.
You think to yourself that you haven't done anything, because in some ways that's a little bit how the country's treated me, or how I felt at times, that I wasn't that relevant and I hadn't really done anything and I felt a bit invisible.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking about it and thinking, yeah, I feel invisible. If I don't tell my story, then it becomes something that no one's ever heard about, and it becomes invisible.
If you do not look after your imagination, it will start to shrivel up and die as you get older, which is why some adults are really, really boring, because they haven't looked after their imaginations. So you do not want that to happen to you, do you? Reading is the best thing for your imagination. Who likes reading?
Even if you're not much of a reader, there's so much to do here and so many things to see and do, so yeah, definitely recommend it.
Literature doesn't have to be intellectual, it doesn't have to be pretentious. It's about everyone and it's accessible, and this literature festival hopefully applies and speaks to all of us.